Hey y'all, tonight we're slipping into the soft, salt-tinged haze of a beach wedding gone sideways. The kind where the champagne's flowing. The guest list reads like a who's who of Mount Olympus, and one conspicuously uninvited goddess decides to rewrite destiny with a piece of fruit. You're standing on the sands of Thessaly, toes digging into wet gravel as the Aegean licks at your ankles, watching Peleus, a mortal king with more audacity than sense, sweat through his ceremonial tunic. His bride, Thetis, isn't just any sea nymph. She's the kind of immortal who can turn into fire, water, or a lioness mid-argument. And right now, she's radiating the kind of quiet fury that makes even Zeus double-check his lightning bolts. But we'll get to that. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this ancient Greek drama stretches tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air smells of roasted lamb and hyacinth garlands, but the real spice here is drama. All the gods showed up for Peleus and Thetis' wedding, except one, Eris, the goddess of discord. You know the type, the relative, who shows up uninvited, eats all the olives, and starts arguments about inheritance. The Olympians figured skipping her invite would keep things civil. Big mistake. Eris rolls up anyway, clutching a golden apple plucked straight from the Hesperides garden. Those nymphs of eternal sunsets who tend Zeus's personal orchard. On its skin, she carves 3 words, to Callistu, for the fairest. Then she underhands it into the crowd like a grenade. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite freeze mid-sip of nectar. Their eyes lock. The music dies. Even the sea seems to hold its breath. These 3 have been side-eyeing each other since the invention of mirrors, and now Eris has handed them a cosmic mic drop. Zeus, no fool, nopes out of judging this mess, and delegates to Paris, a Trojan prince turned shepherd with a reputation for terrible life choices. But we'll meet him later. Here's the thing about that apple. Historians still argue whether it was literal fruit or a metaphor for the toxic allure of vanity. Some even claim it was an orange, a theory that makes 0 sense unless you're high on ambrosia. Meanwhile, Hesiod's Works and Days hints at a deeper layer. Eris isn't just chaos. She's 2 goddesses in one. The bad Eris sows bloodshed, but the good Eris fuels ambition, the kind that makes mortals build cities and write epics. Tonight, though, she's all fangs. Thetis, meanwhile, isn't even enjoying her own wedding. She's stuck marrying a mortal because Zeus got spooked by a prophecy that her son would overthrow him. Classic god logic. Instead of solving the problem, marry it off. Peleus, to his credit, did have to wrestle her through a series of shape-shifting panic attacks. Lion, serpent, literal fire, to earn this union. Imagine your first date involving a chokehold and 3rd-degree burns. But that's love, right? As the goddesses square off over the apple, you can almost taste the pettiness. Hera's offering empire, Athena's hawking battlefield glory, and Aphrodite, she just smirks and whispers, "How about the most beautiful woman alive?" Paris, when he eventually takes the bait, won't know that beautiful woman means Helen of Sparta, a queen whose face will launch 1,000 ships and burn a city to ash. But that's a problem for future Paris. Right now, he's just a guy with a sheep problem and a golden fruit. Thetis, sensing the tectonic shift in the room, grips Peleus's hand tighter. She's seen this before, the way gods toy with fate like it's a lyre string. Her son, when he comes, will be a paradox, half mortal, half divine, destined to die young, but live forever in song. And it all starts here, with a snub, a fruit, and 3 goddesses who'd rather watch the world burn than share a compliment. The air on Mount Ida smells like crushed thyme and sheep dung, a far cry from the perfumed halls of Troy you'll never know. Your calloused hands grip a shepherd's crook, not a scepter, as you whistle to your flock. A stray ram named Asterion butts your thigh, demanding attention. You're just Paris, son of nobody, content with sun-warmed rocks and the way dawn paints the Aegean pink. But the gods love ruining a good thing. Hermes lands in a swirl of iridescent feathers and bad news. His sandals hover half an inch above the dirt, because of course they do. Prince of Troy, he smirks, though you've never heard that title before. Zeus needs a fashion critic. Behind him, 3 women materialize, each glowing like forge-fired metal. Hera's crown pulses with the weight of empires. Athena's owl glares with predator eyes. Aphrodite, well, she smells like every poor decision you'll ever make. Hera steps forward first, her voice like tectonic plates grinding. "Choose me," she says, "and I'll make you king of every shore your shadow touches." The ground shudders as she speaks. Athena's spear tip taps your chin, her gaze sharp enough to flay pride from bone. "Victory," she offers. "Men will sing your tactics for millennia." But Aphrodite just laughs, a sound that makes your ribs ache. She leans close, her breath hot as a smithy's bellows. "Helen," she whispers, "you don't know the name yet, but your blood does." Scholars still argue whether Paris truly had free will, or if the fates greased the scales. Some claim the apple was a metaphor for Troy's hubris. Others insist it was a quince stolen from Hera's personal orchard. The truth? You're 19, lonely, and Aphrodite's lips brush your ear as she describes Helen's collarbones. You hand her the apple. Asterion headbutts you again, snapping you back to reality. The goddesses vanish. Hermes mutters, "Good luck with that," before dissolving into crows. For a heartbeat, you consider chasing him, begging to undo this. But the apple's golden sheen glints in the grass. You pocket it. The first star of evening pulses like a warning. You're standing on the wind-blown battlements of Sparta, the kind of place where marble floors chill your bare feet and the air always smells faintly of olive oil and ambition. Helen, Queen of Sparta, glides past you, her hair a river of gold, her smile a diplomatic weapon. She's married to Menelaus, a king who's more beard than personality. but you can't help noticing the way her gaze lingers on the horizon, as if she's searching for a way out. You've arrived as Paris, Prince of Troy, and you're supposed to be here on a goodwill mission. Instead, you're falling headlong into a myth. The palace is a labyrinth of polished stone and whispered secrets. Servants scurry, careful not to meet your eye, and somewhere in the distance, a lyre plucks out a tune that sounds suspiciously like heartbreak. Paris, for all his shepherd's tan and awkward charm, is a master of the long game. He flatters Helen, tells her stories of Troy's rose gold towers, and listens, really listens, when she talks about the boredom of royal life. Historians still argue whether Helen went willingly or was enchanted by Aphrodite's promise. Some say she left a note. Others claim she vanished like morning mist, leaving only a single sandal behind. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Greeks believed that a woman's beauty could literally cause city-wide chaos. Helen's face, so the poets claim, launched 1,000 ships. That's not just a metaphor. Menelaus's war council actually counted the vessels, and the number stuck. One ancient scribe even tried to claim it was only 1,186 ships. But honestly, who's counting when you're that angry? The night Paris and Helen slip away, the palace is silent except for the distant crash of waves. You sneak through moonlit corridors, heart pounding, as Helen presses a finger to her lips. Outside, a ship waits, its sail painted with the Trojan lion. The sea is black glass, and as you push off from the shore, you can almost hear the gods snickering. Back in Sparta, Menelaus wakes to an empty bed and a kingdom on the verge of scandal. He tears through the palace, beard bristling, demanding answers. The servants scatter like pigeons. By dawn, every port in Greece is buzzing with news. Helen has been taken, or has she run? Either way, the world is about to change. Here's your reality check. If you're hoping for a happy ending, you probably won't survive this. The Greeks don't do forgive and forget. They do raise an army and burn your city to the ground. Within days, Menelaus's brother Agamemnon is calling in favors from every king, warlord, and hero from here to Ithaca. The call to arms rings out, echoing across mountains and islands. You stand on the deck beside Helen, watching the coastline shrink. She shivers, and you offer her your cloak. For a moment, it feels like you've outrun fate, but deep down, you know better. The gods are watching, and they're not done with you yet. You wake to the sound of a rooster crowing and the distinct feeling that you've made a terrible mistake. The sun is barely up, but the Greek countryside is already buzzing with the kind of gossip that makes even the gods blush. Menelaus's messengers have fanned out like over-caffeinated bees, bearing news of Helen's disappearance and demanding help from every king, cousin, and guy who once arm-wrestled a demigod at a wedding. You, of course, are now one of those heroes who's supposed to answer the call. But let's be honest, nobody actually wants to go to war over someone else's marital drama. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, is the poster child for avoidance. He's just finished building a new stone hearth and really doesn't want to leave his newborn son. When the recruiters show up, He pretends to be insane, plowing the beach with salt instead of seed. Classic move. Unfortunately, Palamedes, who apparently missed the "don't ruin a good ruse" memo, tosses Odysseus's baby in front of the plow. Odysseus swerves, the jig is up, and he's drafted. Historians still argue whether Odysseus ever forgave Palamedes or if he just added him to a very long, very creative revenge list. Meanwhile, over in Skyros, Achilles is hiding out in drag. Yes, you heard that right. Achilles, the future terror of Troy, is disguised as a girl among King Lycomedes' daughters. His mother, Thetis, is determined to keep him off the battlefield, since prophecy says he'll either die young and famous or live old and forgotten. Achilles, for his part, is not thrilled about the whole borrowed dress situation. Odysseus, ever the trickster, shows up with a trunk of weapons and jewelry, then sounds an alarm. Achilles grabs a sword instead of a necklace, and just like that, he's outed and conscripted. Sometimes you just can't escape your destiny or your fashion sense. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Greeks had a concept called kleos, or eternal glory. It's why half these guys are willing to risk their necks for a war they didn't start. The idea is, if you die spectacularly enough, people will talk about you for centuries. Achilles is basically the poster boy for this. Meanwhile, Odysseus is more of a let's survive and write the story myself kind of guy. The ships start gathering at Aulis, a port that smells like brine, sweat, and nervous anticipation. The beach is a chaos of sails, bronze armor, and the occasional goat that nobody seems to own. Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother and self-appointed commander-in-chief, is already barking orders and measuring egos. You can practically see the storm clouds gathering, literal ones, thanks to Artemis, who's miffed about a rabbit Agamemnon shot on the way in. The gods, as usual, have opinions. Historians still debate whether the Greek coalition was truly united or just a bunch of frenemies with good PR. Some sources claim there were secret feuds and side deals. Others insist it was all brotherly love and shared wine. Either way, the fleet is massive, hundreds of ships, thousands of warriors, and enough drama to fuel a decade-long siege. You wander through the camp, dodging blacksmiths, poets, and a guy selling what he claims are genuine Trojan souvenirs. Spoiler, they're just painted rocks. The air is thick with anticipation and the faint whiff of impending doom. You overhear Achilles grumbling about sand in his sandals and Odysseus muttering about just wanting to go home. You can't blame them. After all, who really wants to fight a war for someone else's bad decision? But the die is cast. The ships are ready, the omens are mixed, and somewhere the gods are placing bets on who will survive the first week. You, meanwhile, are just hoping the food improves. You stand on the creaking deck of a warship, the salty spray stinging your eyes as the fleet finally leaves Aulis behind. The wine-dark sea stretches out before you, its surface dimpled by the oar strokes of 1,000 ships. The horizon is a blur of bronze and white sails, each vessel crammed with warriors, horses, and enough olive oil to deep fry an entire city-state. The air is thick with the scent of sweat, pine tar, and the kind of nervous excitement that only comes before disaster. The Greek Armada is a floating city, each ship its own little universe. Achilles' myrmidons sharpen their spears and swap stories about the time their boss outran a river. Odysseus paces the deck, already plotting his next escape. Ajax, the human siege tower, polishes his shield until it gleams like a second sun. You, meanwhile, try not to get seasick. The gods, as usual, are watching from above, probably placing bets on who'll lose their lunch first. Here's a mainstream historical fact to anchor you. According to Homer, the Greeks launched more than 1,000 ships, an unprecedented show of force in the ancient world. Some modern scholars argue that the number was wildly exaggerated for poetic effect, but the sight of so many sails on the horizon would have been enough to terrify any city. The logistics alone are mind-boggling. Feeding, watering, and organizing this many warriors is like herding cats, if the cats were armed and prone to heroic sulking. As the fleet approaches Troy, the coastline rises out of the haze, cliffs crowned with wind-bent pines, golden beaches, and in the distance, the faint glint of Troy's towers. The city itself is legendary, thick walls said to be built by Poseidon and Apollo, gates wide enough to drive a chariot through, and a population that knows how to throw a festival at the drop of a laurel wreath. You can almost hear the music drifting across the water, a siren song of home and hearth. But first, a detour. The fleet lands at the wrong place, a little town called Mysia, ruled by King Telephus. The Greeks, never ones to pass up a good sacking, attack immediately. Telephus, wounded by Achilles, flees, and the Greeks realize their mistake only after burning half the town. Here's your quirky tidbit. Telephus later consults an oracle, who tells him that he who wounded you will heal you. Achilles, ever the multitasker, ends up scraping rust from his spear into Telephus's wound, which miraculously heals. Historians still argue whether this was an early form of homeopathy or just a convenient excuse for Achilles to show off. Back on the ships, morale is a mixed bag. Some warriors are itching for glory, others are already homesick. You overhear one grizzled veteran complaining about the lack of decent wine, and another swearing he saw a sea monster off the port bow. Fun fact, ancient Greeks genuinely believed in sea monsters, and every strange shadow in the water was fair game for a good panic. Days blur into one another. Sunrise, rowing, the slap of waves against hulls, and the endless drone of heroic boasting. At night, the fleet anchors in sheltered coves, fires flickering on the decks as warriors trade stories and try to ignore the ominous creaking of the timbers. You fall asleep to the sound of gulls and the distant howl of wolves on the mainland. Finally, after what feels like a lifetime at sea, the fleet rounds the headland and Troy comes into full view. The city is bigger, brighter, and more intimidating than you ever imagined. The towers gleam in the afternoon sun, and the walls look high enough to scrape the belly of the sky. The Greeks gather on the decks, silent for once as the realization sinks in. This will not be an easy fight. You step onto the sand, feeling the weight of history settle on your shoulders. The beach is wide and flat, perfect for building a camp, but also for being seen by every lookout in Troy. As you gaze up at the city's walls, you can't help but wonder, will you be remembered as a hero or just another name lost to the sea? You drag your feet through the sand, the heat already rising as the Greeks begin staking their claim along Troy's endless shoreline. The ships are pulled up, hulls creaking like old bones, and the first order of business is building a camp that could survive a decade, or at least a really bad weekend. You're surrounded by the clang of hammers, the shouts of men arguing over tent space, and the smell of roasting goat, which, let's be honest, is the only thing keeping morale above sea level. The Greeks aren't exactly subtle. They set up a sprawling encampment right on the beach, close enough for Troy's sentries to count every helmet. Rows of black ships form a makeshift wall, and soon the sand is crowded with tents, altars, and the occasional makeshift wine bar. You spot Agamemnon's pavilion, bigger than most starter homes, flying a banner that basically screams overcompensating. Achilles' tent, meanwhile, is a little further off, surrounded by myrmidons who look like they could bench press a chariot. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Archaeologists have found evidence of multiple layers of settlement at the site of ancient Troy, suggesting it was rebuilt several times after destruction. Some believe the Trojan War was inspired by a real siege, maybe even several, mashed together by poets who never met a plot twist they didn't like. Historians still argue whether Homer's Troy was the same as the one unearthed by Heinrich Schliemann in the 19th century, or if he just made the whole thing up after a few too many cups of wine. You help unload supplies, shields, spears, amphora of wine, and enough salted fish to feed an army, or, more accurately, to make everyone very tired of salted fish. The Greeks dig trenches and build defensive walls, just in case the Trojans decide to get creative with their welcome party. Some warriors carve their names into rocks, hoping to cheat oblivion. Others just nap in the shade, dreaming of home. The first days are a flurry of skirmishes. The Greeks test Troy's defenses, launching raids on outlying farms and capturing livestock. The Trojans, for their part, sally out with chariots and archers, making it clear that they're not just going to roll over. You watch as Ajax lifts a battering ram like it's a toothpick, and Achilles races across the plain, his armor catching the sun. The ground shakes with the impact of heroes colliding, and you realize this isn't just a war, it's a contest of legends. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Greeks believed in Apotropaic symbols, little charms or carvings meant to ward off evil. You spot a few warriors hanging tiny Medusa heads from their belts, hoping to scare away bad luck, or maybe just their bunkmates. One guy even claims his mother packed him a crocodile dung amulet for protection. Hey, whatever works. As the siege drags on, routines set in. The Greeks build altars to the gods, sacrificing bulls and sheep in hopes of divine favor. The Trojans watch from their walls, occasionally sending taunts or arrows. At night, the fires of both camps flicker across the plain, and you can almost imagine peace until a drunken brawl breaks out over who gets the last cup of wine. Some things never change. Historians still debate how long the Greeks expected the siege to last. Some say they thought it would be over in weeks. Others argue that everyone knew it would be a marathon, not a sprint. What's certain is that both sides settle in for the long haul, their lives shrinking to the rhythms of camp, battle, and uneasy sleep. You lie on your back, staring up at the stars, the sounds of distant laughter, and the occasional owl mixing with the crash of waves. Somewhere, a lyre plucks out a mournful tune, and you wonder if your name will be sung by future generations, or if you'll just be another ghost haunting these sands. You wake to the sound of coughing, deep, hacking, the kind that rattles tents and nerves. The Greek camp is shrouded in a sickly haze, and you can taste the bitterness in the air even before you stumble outside. The sun barely peeks over the horizon, but already the healers are busy, their hands stained with herbs and desperation. Something's wrong. The bravest warriors are doubled over, feverish, their skins slick with sweat. The stench of illness mingles with the ever-present tang of brine. It doesn't take long for the rumors to spread. Apollo, the silver-bowed god, is angry. Apparently, Agamemnon, in a display of classic leadership skills, managed to offend one of Apollo's priests by refusing to return his daughter, Chryseis, who'd been taken as a prize. The priest begged, the Greeks sneered, and now the god's arrows rain down as plague. You'd think after years of dealing with the gods, someone would have learned to read the room. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Epidemics were a constant threat in ancient warfare, often killing more soldiers than actual combat. The Iliad's opening lines don't start with a battle. They start with a plague. Historians still argue whether Homer was inspired by real outbreaks like typhus or cholera, or if he just wanted to remind everyone that the gods have a wicked sense of humor. You trudge through the camp, sidestepping puddles of foul water and muttering prayers to any deity who'll listen. The healers try everything: garlic poultices, burnt offerings, even crocodile dung sunscreen. Remember that guy? Nothing works. The men grow restless, blaming Agamemnon, then each other, then the gods. Achilles, meanwhile, sulks in his tent, refusing to fight until Agamemnon gives up Chryseis. The camp divides into factions, and you can feel the tension crackling in the air like static before a storm. Quirky tidbit for you. Ancient Greeks believed that Apollo could both cause and cure plagues. His temples were often built outside city walls, just in case he decided to drop by unannounced with a fresh batch of divine germs. Some warriors even sleep with laurel leaves under their pillows, hoping to ward off the god's wrath. You try it one night, but all you get is a stiff neck and a weird dream about golden arrows. The stalemate drags on. Supplies run low, tempers flare, and the Trojans watch from their walls, probably enjoying the spectacle. You overhear one of Agamemnon's advisors mutter that maybe they should just apologize to Apollo and move on. But pride, as always, gets in the way. Agamemnon finally relents, returning Chryseis to her father, but not before snatching Achilles' prize, Briseis, as compensation. Achilles' rage is volcanic. He refuses to fight, and suddenly, the Greeks' greatest weapon is sulking harder than a teenager grounded from his chariot. Historians still debate whether this rift between Agamemnon and Achilles was based on real events or just poetic license. Some say it's a metaphor for the dangers of unchecked ego. Others think it's just good drama. Either way, the Greeks are in trouble, and you're stuck in the middle, dodging both arrows and arguments. At night, the camp is quieter than usual. The fires burn low, and the usual songs are replaced by whispered fears. You lie awake, listening to the distant sound of Trojan flutes drifting over the walls, and wonder if the gods ever get tired of playing with mortal lives. Probably not. After all, what's a little plague between friends? You're pacing the edge of the Greek camp, sand squishing between your toes, when the air suddenly crackles with a tension that's not just from too much garlic at dinner. Overhead, the sky is a patchwork of storm clouds and sunlight, classic weather for divine meddling. You glance up and, for a split second, swear you see a flash of gold and peacock feathers, then a shimmer of owl wings. The gods, it seems, have officially joined the party. On Troy's walls, King Priam's family gathers to watch the spectacle. You spot Hector, the city's golden boy, standing tall beside his brother Paris, who's still looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. But the real action is happening above your head, where the Olympians are bickering like it's Thanksgiving dinner and someone brought up politics. Zeus, king of the gods, tries to play referee, but Hera and Athena are already plotting against Troy, while Aphrodite and Apollo are firmly in the Trojan fan club. It's less divine intervention and more celestial reality show. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Iliad is packed with scenes of gods directly influencing the war, from turning the tide of battle to literally snatching warriors out of danger. Ancient Greeks believed their deities were deeply involved in human affairs, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, and always playing favorites. Historians still argue whether these stories were meant to be taken literally or if they're poetic metaphors for the unpredictable chaos of war. You watch as Athena, disguised as a Greek warrior, whispers courage into the ear of Diomedes, who suddenly fights like he's had 3 cups of extra strong coffee. Meanwhile, Apollo shields Hector from certain death, his lyre humming with power. The gods don't just pick sides, they pick moments, swooping in to save their favorites or trip up their enemies. You can't help but wonder if your own string of bad luck isn't just the result of some minor deity losing a bet. Quirky tidbit. There's a legend that the gods would sometimes disguise themselves as birds or animals to spy on mortals. So if you ever see a suspiciously judgmental heron or a fox that seems to be smirking, you might want to watch what you say. In fact, one night, you spot a tortoise crawling through the camp, and for a moment, you're convinced it's Zeus on reconnaissance. Spoiler, it's just looking for lettuce. The divine drama escalates. Hera bribes Sleep, the god of, you guessed it, sleep, to knock Zeus out for a while, so she and Poseidon can help the Greeks. Meanwhile, Aphrodite gets herself wounded, trying to save her son Aeneas, and limps off the battlefield in a huff. You start to realize that, for all their power, the gods are just as messy as the mortals they claim to rule. Historians still debate how much of the Trojan War's outcome was fated versus the result of mortal choices. Some say the gods are just a narrative device, a way to explain the inexplicable. Others believe the stories reflect a genuine belief in destiny and divine justice. Either way, you're left wondering if your next move is really yours, or if you're just a pawn in some cosmic board game. As the sun sets, the sky flickers with lightning. Zeus's way of reminding everyone who's boss. You huddle by the fire, listening to the distant rumble, and try to ignore the feeling that somewhere a goddess is rolling her eyes at your attempts to get comfortable. After all, in a war where even the gods can't agree, what chance do mere mortals have? You find yourself pressed up against the makeshift palisade, heart thumping as the dawn chorus is drowned out by the clash of bronze and the roar of warriors. Today is different. The Greeks and Trojans have agreed to settle things, at least for now, with single combat, no mass brawls, no sneaky night raids, just two champions, face to face, while the rest of you try not to spill your breakfast in anticipation. The air is thick with tension and the smell of trampled wildflowers. The Greeks line up behind their champion, Ajax, a literal mountain of a man whose shield could double as a dining table. Across the field, Hector, Troy's favorite son, stands tall, his armor gleaming in the early sun. Paris, looking like he'd rather be back with his sheep, is nowhere near the front lines. Instead, he's probably hiding behind a fig tree, composing love poetry for Helen. You can't blame him. If you had to face Ajax, you'd suddenly remember a lot of chores back home too. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Single combat was a real thing in ancient warfare, though not as common as the poets would have you believe. It was a way to minimize bloodshed, or at least to give everyone a good show. Historians still argue whether these duels actually decided battles or were just a bit of heroic theater to keep morale up. Either way, today's crowd is eating it up. The duel begins with a flurry of spear throws. Ajax's first shot dents Hector's shield, sending a shiver through the Trojan ranks. Hector retaliates, his spear glancing off Ajax's armor with a sound like a gong. The two circle, trading blows and insults, neither willing to give an inch. You catch snippets of their banter, Hector's sharp wit, Ajax's gruff retorts, and realize that even in the middle of war, a good comeback is worth its weight in gold. Quirky tidbit. According to some later sources, Ajax was so large as a child that his mother had to wrap him in a lion skin instead of a baby blanket. Whether or not that's true, the man definitely skipped a leg day. His calves are the stuff of legend. And Hector? He's rumored to have named his favorite horse Lightning, which is either a sign of poetic flair or a serious case of wishful thinking. The fight drags on. neither hero able to land a decisive blow. The sun climbs higher, sweat pours, and the crowd grows restless. Eventually, the duel is called a draw. Gifts are exchanged. Ajax gives Hector a sword, Hector hands over a fancy belt, and both sides retreat, grumbling about missed opportunities and the price of olive oil. Historians still debate whether these duels were actually about honor or just a clever way to buy time. Some say the leaders hoped the spectacle would break the deadlock, while others think it was all about stroking egos. You, meanwhile, are just glad nobody's throwing spears in your direction. As the day winds down, you wander back to camp, replaying the clash in your mind. The Greeks and Trojans may be enemies, but in moments like this, you see flashes of respect. Two warriors bound by fate and the knowledge that tomorrow the war will rage on. You settle by the fire, nursing a bruise from an over-enthusiastic cheer, and wonder what it would be like if all wars were settled with contests and clever insults. Maybe, just maybe, the world would be a little less bloody and a lot more entertaining. You're standing in the shadow of Troy's towering walls, watching Hector rally his troops with the kind of confidence that makes you wonder if he's secretly read the script. The morning air is sharp, carrying the scent of trampled grass and the distant tang of roasting onions, because even during a siege, someone's always hungry. The Trojans are restless, their armor gleaming as they gather at the gates. Today, Hector is determined to push the Greeks all the way back to their ships. The city's gates groan open, and Hector leads the charge, chariot wheels spitting mud as he thunders onto the plain. You're swept along in the tide of warriors, the ground shaking beneath your feet. The Greeks scramble to form ranks, but Hector's momentum is unstoppable. He's everywhere at once, slicing through shields, calling out orders, and somehow managing to look heroic even when covered in dust. You catch a glimpse of his famous horse, Lightning, living up to its name as it weaves through the chaos. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Iliad's most intense battles are fought not at Troy's walls, but on the open plain between the city and the Greek camp. Historians still argue whether the real Troy had such a vast battlefield, or if Homer just needed room for all those dramatic chariot duels. Archaeological digs have found traces of ancient fortifications and burial mounds, but the scale of these epic clashes remains a subject of debate. The fighting is fierce. Hector's spearwork is legendary. He knocks Ajax flat, wounds several Greek captains, and even throws a spear that grazes Agamemnon's helmet, which, let's be honest, probably needed a good dent anyway. The Trojans press forward, emboldened by Hector's courage and the sight of the Greeks stumbling. For a moment, it looks like the siege might end right here, with the Greeks driven into the sea. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources claim Hector's armor was so finely made that it was later claimed as a trophy by Achilles and eventually offered as a prize in funeral games. There's even a theory that it was crafted by the gods themselves, which would explain why it seems to deflect everything except plot-critical weapons. The Greeks, desperate, fall back to their ships. The air is thick with the sound of clashing bronze and the cries of wounded men. Fires break out in the camp as Trojan torches sail overhead, and for a terrifying moment, it seems the entire fleet might go up in flames. You're running, dodging arrows, when you hear the unmistakable voice of Nestor, the oldest and wisest of the Greek leaders, shouting for order. He's got more wrinkles than a raisin, but somehow manages to rally the troops with a few well-placed insults and a promise of extra rations. Historians still debate whether this near catastrophe was a turning point engineered by clever generals or just the result of a really bad day for the Greeks. Some say it was Hector's finest hour, while others point out that the gods were probably nudging things along for maximum drama. As night falls, the Trojans pull back, singing songs of victory and tossing laurel wreaths in Hector's honor. The Greeks, battered and bruised, huddle by their ships, wondering if tomorrow will bring salvation or disaster. You sit by the dying embers of a campfire, nursing a burnt eyebrow and thinking that, for all its glory, war is mostly about surviving to see another sunrise. You're awake before dawn, the air thick with the scent of smoke and singed pride. The Greek camp is quieter than usual. No boasting, no laughter, just the soft shuffle of feet and the occasional groan from a wounded hero. Achilles is still sulking in his tent, refusing to fight, and the Greeks are feeling the absence like a missing limb. You can sense the tension, the way every glance lingers a little too long. Every whispered conversation carries a hint of desperation. Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, moves through the camp with a worried frown. He pauses by your fire, offering a tight smile and a few words of encouragement. You know he's been trying to coax Achilles back into battle, but so far, no luck. The Myrmidons, usually the most fearsome warriors on the field, sit idle, sharpening their weapons and muttering about lost glory. You can't help but wonder if even the gods are getting tired of this standoff. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the Iliad, Patroclus is often described as Achilles' other self, a bond so close that later writers would debate its true nature for centuries. Historians still argue whether their relationship was purely platonic, deeply romantic, or something in between. What's clear is that Patroclus's loyalty to Achilles is legendary, and, as you're about to see, tragically fateful. The day drags on, the Trojans growing bolder. With each hour, Achilles stays away. Hector leads another assault, pushing the Greeks all the way to their ships. The situation is dire. You watch as Patroclus, unable to bear the suffering any longer, begs Achilles to let him wear his armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle. Achilles, torn between pride and compassion, finally relents. He helps Patroclus into the gleaming armor that fits a little too loosely, the helmet slipping just so. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources claim that Achilles' armor was forged by Hephaestus himself, complete with scenes of cosmic chaos and dancing stars. There's even a story that the shield alone was so dazzling it could blind anyone who stared at it too long. You try to sneak a peek, but end up seeing nothing but your own reflection, looking more anxious than heroic. Patroclus rides out, the Myrmidons at his back, and for a moment the Greeks rally. The Trojans, seeing what they believe is Achilles returned, falter. Patroclus fights with a fury born of love and desperation, driving the Trojans from the ships, and even slaying Sarpedon, a son of Zeus. The tide seems to turn until Patroclus, caught up in the heat of battle, pursues the Trojans all the way to the walls of Troy. Historians still debate whether Patroclus's death was the result of hubris, fate, or simply bad luck. Some say he was doomed the moment he donned Achilles' armor. Others argue he was a victim of the gods' cruel games. What's certain is that Hector, seeing his chance, strikes Patroclus down, stripping the borrowed armor and sending shockwaves through the Greek camp. You feel the loss like a physical blow. The Myrmidons retreat, carrying Patroclus's body back to Achilles, who collapses in grief and rage. The camp is silent, the only sound, the crackle of funeral fires and the distant cries of victory from the Trojan walls. You lie awake that night, the memory of Patroclus's courage and the weight of borrowed armor heavy on your mind. The war has shifted, and you know that nothing will ever be the same. You're sitting cross-legged in the dust, watching Achilles unravel. The tent is thick with grief and rage, the kind that makes the air feel heavy, like a thunderstorm about to break. Patroclus's body lies nearby, shrouded in linen, and Achilles is hunched over, fists clenched, eyes wild. You've never seen him like this, his usual swagger replaced by something raw and dangerous. The Myrmidons keep their distance, whispering about omens and curses. Even the bravest seem uneasy, as if Achilles' sorrow might be contagious. The news of Patroclus' death spreads like wildfire. You hear it in the way the camp falls silent, in the sudden, sharp glances traded between warriors. The Greeks know what's coming. Achilles, once the pride of the camp, is about to become its avenging spirit. He calls for his mother, Thetis, who rises from the sea, her veil streaming with salt water and sorrow. She promises new armor forged by Hephaestus himself, the god of fire and metalwork. You catch a glimpse as it arrives. The shield alone is a masterpiece, swirling with images of stars, cities, and the endless dance of fate. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Iliad devotes a full book to the making of Achilles' new armor, describing every detail with loving precision. Historians still argue whether this was Homer's way of showing off his poetic chops or a nod to the importance of craftsmanship in ancient Greek culture. Either way, the armor is more than just protection. It's a symbol of Achilles' return, a warning to every Trojan within earshot. Quirky tidbit: some later storytellers claim that the shield was so perfectly balanced you could spin it on a single finger. Others said it was cursed, bringing doom to anyone who wore it without the proper respect. You try to imagine spinning it yourself, but decide your wrists are better suited for carrying water jugs. Achilles emerges from his tent, gleaming in his new armor, and the Greeks rally around him. He doesn't bother with speeches, just a look, cold and clear, that says everything. The Trojans, seeing him on the field, waver. Even Hector feels a chill, though he hides it well. The gods, meanwhile, are having their own crisis meeting. Zeus, torn between his promises to Thetis and his fondness for Troy, tries to stay neutral. Historians still debate whether the gods' interventions reflect real religious beliefs or are just a way to explain the wild swings of fortune in war. The battle that follows is chaos. Achilles fights like a man possessed, cutting down Trojans by the dozen. You watch as he chases the river god Scamander, who tries to drown him in a fit of divine pique. Achilles escapes, mud-splattered and furious, his wrath undiminished. The Trojans retreat, their confidence shattered, but Achilles isn't finished. He wants Hector, the man who killed Patroclus. The city holds its breath as Hector stands before the gates, his family begging him to come inside. But Hector, bound by honor and fate, refuses. You can feel the tension, the sense that everything has been building to this moment. You find yourself caught between awe and dread. Achilles' grief has become a weapon, and nothing, not even the gods, seems able to stop him. The war has entered a new, darker phase, and you wonder who will survive the storm that's about to break. You're pressed against the city wall, heart pounding, as the dust of the plain swirls into the blood-red sunset. The air is heavy with dread and anticipation. Achilles is back, and everyone knows what that means. You watch as he stalks the battlefield, a living storm in his new armor, eyes fixed on Hector, who stands alone before Troy's gates. The city behind him is silent. Even the children sense that this is no ordinary duel. Hector's family crowds the ramparts, Priam, his father, clutching the stones with trembling hands, and Andromache, his wife, holding their son, Astyanax. You can almost hear her whispered pleas, begging Hector to come inside, to live, to choose family over fate. But Hector shakes his head. Honor, destiny, and the weight of 1,000 years pressed down on his shoulders. Historians still argue whether Hector's last stand was a real act of heroism or just the ultimate tragic necessity. But in this moment, you see only a man trying to do right by everyone he loves. Achilles circles, his armor blazing in the fading light. The two warriors face each other, and for a heartbeat, time seems to pause. Then Hector runs, yes, runs, around the walls of Troy, with Achilles in relentless pursuit. 3 times they circle the city, their footsteps echoing on stone and sand. The gods watch, some pitying, some vengeful. Athena, ever the tactician, tricks Hector into stopping, promising him a fair fight. You can't help but roll your eyes. Divine interference, as usual. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The duel between Achilles and Hector is one of the most famous scenes in all of Western literature. Ancient audiences would have known the outcome, but that didn't stop them from hoping every time that Hector might somehow escape his fate. Some modern scholars suggest that this scene reflects real Bronze Age warrior customs, where single combat could decide the fate of armies. Quirky tidbit. There's a fringe theory that Hector's name, meaning holder or defender, was actually a title passed down through generations of Trojan champions. If true, you wonder how many Hectors Troy really had, and if any of them managed to retire peacefully. The fight is brutal and swift. Hector, exhausted and alone, lands a desperate blow, but Achilles' new armor turns it aside. Achilles strikes back, his spear finding its mark. Hector falls, and the city's cries rise up, a wail that seems to shake the very walls. Achilles, still burning with grief and rage, lashes Hector's body to his chariot and drags it around the city, a final insult that horrifies even the gods. Historians still debate whether this act was pure vengeance or a necessary display of dominance. Some say Achilles crossed a line, losing his humanity in his quest for justice. Others argue that, in a world ruled by honor and reputation, such acts were part of the grim logic of war. You stand in the gathering darkness, watching the fires flicker on Troy's walls. The greatest defender has fallen, and the city's fate is now sealed. You shiver, not from the cold, but from the knowledge that nothing, no hero, no god, no wall, can stop what's coming next. You're slumped against a half-collapsed tent, the night air thick with the smell of sweat, smoke, and the bitter tang of victory. The Greeks are celebrating, but it's a hollow, haunted kind of joy. Achilles, still not satisfied, drags Hector's body around Patroclus's tomb day after day, the dust and indignity piling up with each lap. Even the gods are getting uncomfortable. Apollo shields Hector's corpse from decay, and eventually Zeus himself sends a message. Enough is enough. Inside Troy, the mood is even darker. Priam, the old king, moves through his palace like a ghost, his grief so deep you can almost feel it pressing against your chest. One night, you watch as he slips out of the city, guided by Hermes in disguise. He carries no weapons, only treasure, and the desperate hope that he can ransom his son's body from the man who killed him. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The scene where Priam kneels before Achilles, kissing the hands that murdered his son, is often cited as one of the most powerful moments in all of ancient literature. Historians still argue whether such acts of mercy and reconciliation actually happened in Bronze Age warfare, or if Homer was just being poetic. Either way, the image of two enemies weeping together over shared loss has echoed down through centuries. Quirky tidbit: some ancient storytellers claim that Priam brought a secret magical talisman with him to Achilles' tent, a stone that made its holder irresistible to all who saw him. Whether it was magic or just the raw force of a father's grief, Achilles is moved. He returns Hector's body, and for a moment, the endless cycle of revenge pauses. You watch as the Trojans light the funeral pyre, the flames licking the sky, the city holding its breath in mourning. The Greeks, meanwhile, are restless. The war drags on, but something fundamental has shifted. Achilles, his anger finally spent, knows his own death is near. He's lost his closest friend, his greatest enemy, and, in many ways, himself. You sense that even the gods are growing weary of the endless bloodshed. The camp is quieter now, the laughter forced, the songs tinged with sorrow. Historians still debate what happened after Hector's funeral. Some say the Greeks tried to storm Troy's walls again and again, only to be repelled by the Trojans' cunning and the city's formidable defenses. Others claim that both sides turned to trickery and secret negotiations, desperate for any way to end the stalemate. What's certain is that the war has become a test of endurance, a slow grind that wears down even the strongest. You wander through the camp, past warriors tending wounds, both old and new, and wonder how much longer anyone can keep fighting. The gods may have started this war, but it's mortals who have to live with its consequences. The fires burn low, and somewhere in the darkness you hear the soft sound of a lyre playing a tune that sounds suspiciously like goodbye. You're perched on a rooftop, the wind tugging at your cloak as you watch the city of Troy shimmer in the morning haze. The walls, once thought unbreakable, now seem more like a cage than a fortress. The Greeks, restless and battered, have grown tired of siege and stalemate. Whispers ripple through the camp. Odysseus, the wily king of Ithaca, has a plan so audacious it sounds like a joke. Build a giant wooden horse, leave it at Troy's gates, and pretend to sail away. You help gather timber, the air filled with the scent of fresh-cut pine and the constant thud of hammers. The horse rises, impossibly huge and hollow, its sides echoing with the laughter of the warriors who will hide inside. You can't help but marvel at the absurdity. This is either the world's most elaborate prank or the last desperate gamble of men who've run out of options. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The story of the Trojan horse isn't actually in Homer's Iliad. It comes from later Greek epics and the Roman poet Virgil's Aeneid. Historians still argue whether there was ever a real horse, or if the tale is a metaphor for siege engines or a clever infiltration. Either way, the image has become iconic, a symbol of cunning, betrayal, and the dangers of accepting gifts from your enemies. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources claim the horse was so large that it scraped the city gate as it rolled through, and that the Trojans had to knock down part of their own wall just to get it inside. Others insist there was a secret inscription on its flank, promising safe passage home to anyone who honored Athena. You squint at the wood, but all you see are splinters and the nervous faces of your fellow conspirators. The Greeks stage their retreat, burning tents and sailing out of sight, leaving only the horse and a lone deserter named Sinon to spin a tale for the curious Trojans. You watch from the shadows as the city erupts in debate. Should they trust this gift or burn it where it stands? Cassandra, the doomed prophetess, screams warnings no one will heed. Laocoon, the priest, hurls a spear at the horse, only to be silenced by a pair of sea serpents. Because when the gods want you to ignore good advice, they really commit. Historians still debate whether the Trojans truly believed the Greeks had given up, or if desperation and exhaustion simply made hope irresistible. The gates creak open. The horse is dragged inside. The city bursts into celebration, music and laughter echoing through the streets. You slip away, heart pounding, knowing that night will bring a reckoning no one will forget. As darkness falls, the signal is given. The belly of the horse cracks open, and Greek warriors spill out, racing to open the gates for the returning army. You follow, your footsteps muffled by centuries of dust and fate. Troy, the city of legends, is about to fall, not to brute force, but to the quiet genius of human cunning. You find yourself drifting now, the fires of Troy fading to embers as the night stretches soft and endless. The city's towers, once sharp against the sky, blur into gentle shadows. The shouts and clamor of battle dissolve into a hush, like waves smoothing the sand after a storm. You lie back, feeling the cool stone beneath you, the distant hum of voices fading into a lullaby of memory. The smoke of burning dreams curls upward, but here, in this quiet, you feel safe, cradled by the same stars that watched over heroes and kings. The ache of loss softens, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of breath and the comfort of knowing that even the greatest stories must end. The gods have gone silent, their quarrels set aside, and the world is left to mortals, flawed, hopeful, and endlessly resilient. Let your thoughts drift, following the winding river of time away from the fires of Troy, past the ruins and the ashes, into fields where wildflowers reclaim the earth. The city's fall becomes a distant echo, a story told in whispers and dreams. You are weightless, carried on the breeze, the burdens of war and worry slipping away with each breath. Tonight, you are neither hero nor victim, just a traveler pausing at the edge of legend, wrapped in the gentle hush that follows every epic. The world is quiet now, and you are free to rest, knowing that dawn will bring new stories, new hopes, and the promise of peace. Sleep well, dreamer. The siege is over, and the night is yours.